Hey everyone, this is Carbonite, and today I thought I'd bring you another deck profile, this time a profile of high streamer Lilfa. So before we get started with the deck profile, I do want to start off by saying that this deck is actually just very rough, and I don't mean just like the deck build is rough, but playing it and actually trying to get it to work is really rough. So if you plan on building this deck, I would say lower your expectations about what it can do and how well it's going to perform, because this really is honestly like a C tier deck. It is just has so many problems, and hopefully they get fixed with the next couple of sets. But I think this deck needs some serious work in order to actually be viable. And with that, let's go ahead and get into it. So, starting off with the ride line, of course, we're going to be starting off with the grade 0 Lilfa. It does actually matter that you are playing the Lilfa for one actual card in this deck, but it's just your generic D-starter. Moving on to the grade 1. The grade 1 actually has a skill where when it is ridden over by the grade 2 Lilfa, you get to choose a grade 2 or greater card from your hand. You call it to a back row center rear guard circle, so basically behind the vanguard, so you don't really have a choice. It gets boost, but if you do call a card, you do actually draw a card. So you're essentially just plussing off doing the ride line, which is something this deck definitely desperately needs. And honestly, just this one ride line card is not enough. Going into the grade 2, its skill is that when it is rode upon by the grade 3 Lilfa, you actually get to choose one of your grade 2 or greater rear guards, and you return it to the hand. So the main play that you would be going for with this is you ride over the grade 2, call out something behind the vanguard, swing for a big number, which is probably going to go through, just given the nature of everything. And then you ride over with the grade 3, and then you bounce back whatever was in the center rear guard circle back to your hand. So honestly, whatever you call off the grade 1 doesn't actually matter, because once you ride into your grade 3, you're going to be adding it back to your hand in any case. So you can call extra persona rides, you can call whatever card you really want. Just keep in mind that it is being placed during the ride phase and not the main phase, which is going to be important for some things later. But getting into the grade 3 Lilfa herself, so she does have 2 skills. So the first is that you can Soul Blast 1 once per turn and give all of your grade 2 or greater rear guards boost. So now they don't get any power, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that this only affects the units that are in play at the time, so you can't actually activate this skill, call something, and then that thing will get boost, because I'm pretty sure that's not how it works. Anyways, the other skill is the main skill, obviously. So at the end of the battle, this unit attacks. If your back row has 3 or more grade 2 or greater rear guards, you can counterblast 1, you choose a rear guard each from your front and back row, return them to the hand, and then if you return 2 cards, you get to choose one grade 3 card. No, it has to be a grade 3 card. It can't be anything else. You get to call it to an open rearguard circle. So the skill does kind of combo a little bit with itself, because what you can do is you can have your grade 3 rearguard, you swing at Van, and then you swing with the Vanguard, or you swing with the Vanguard. You bounce back. You can bounce back an entire column, or you can bounce what was boosting the Vanguard, because it's going to be a grade 2 or grade 3, because it is going to be getting boost with that. You bounce them back to your hand, and then you call back what you bounced. The main problem with this is that fact that Lilfa can actually only call grade 3 cards, and that just kind of makes this deck just so much worse than it could be. Basically, playing this deck is playing a worse version of Bastion combined with a worse version of Kyrie. So you do get to bounce some things, but you only get to bounce 2 things per turn, and you can't even choose 2 things in the front row. There are a lot of good reusable rear guards in Lyrical that Kyrie takes advantage of. The problem with that is a lot of them are grade 1, which does not have any synergy at all with your deck, because in order to actually bounce those cards into your hand, you do need to have grade 2 or greater rear guards in your back row, which means if you want to play any grade 1 cards that have good on-play skills in order to recall them, you actually do need to put them in the front row. Otherwise, you can't really bounce them back, because all your grade 2s need to be in the back row, or your grade 3s. But I would say that's honestly really the biggest problem with Lilfa. Well, one of them. We'll get into the rest later. Alright, so moving on to the main deck, we are going to be starting off with just the 3 other copies of Lilfa. Persona Ride is extremely important in this deck, especially with the fact that Lilfa's skill does give you a 4th attack every single turn, provided you can meet the requirements of having that full back row of grade 2s or grade 3s. So having that Persona Ride and being able to swing multiple times under the Persona Ride really is this deck's only win condition. So gotta play the Persona Ride. Alright, so moving into the actual grade 3s, which is honestly the most important part of the deck because you can actually only call grade 3s in order to multi-attack. So being able to keep them in your hand and multi-attack with them is very important. So getting started with them, the most important one, Lilfa's actual triple rare from the set 3. This is Citrede, sure. Anyways, this card is actually not completely terrible. Its skill is when it's placed on rear from hand, so during the main phase or battle phase. If your Vanguard is Lilfa, it gets an extra 5k. So that skill is extremely underwhelming, and the fact that this is one of the best cards for Lilfa should really clue you into like how bad this deck really is. But it is, I will say it is pretty nice because it is swinging for 18, which is a nice number. Boosted by grade 2, which is probably going to be 10k. That's swing for 28. Under a Persona Ride, that's 38. Those are all just like really good magic numbers. Overall, a pretty good card. And she does actually have another skill, which is if it is placed only during the main phase. So if you call this off ride line, if you call this during the battle phase, you don't get this skill. But it basically is a Calamity Tower where you get a Soul Blast 2 and draw a card. Now that Soul Blast 2 is actually good for 2 reasons. For one, you need to Soul Blast your ride line for a card we'll get into later. And for 2, you desperately need cards in this deck. The biggest issue is not finding those pieces if you run out of grade 3s. Let's say you call one too many to the board and you can't really optimize how you're going to be bouncing them back, and you want to be able to reuse this skill multiple times. So let's say this is your only grade 3 and you have to bounce it back to your hand. Well, you have to call it back if you want to get that 4th attack, which means it's no longer in your hand in order to use that on play skill. So you don't get that extra draw. Sure, you get an extra 5k, but really at this state in Overdress, an extra 5k, it wasn't even good in set 1. So yeah. Alright, so moving on to the next grade 3. This one is actually what makes the deck actually kind of interesting to play. It's going to be the 3 copies of this girl. Her name is Rakali, whatever. Anyways, so she is a grade 3, 13. She has one skill, which is a continuous. So during your turn, this card can attack the Vanguard, and it gets plus 10k. So you might be thinking, oh, whatever, it's a 23, but it can only swing at rears. But remember, this is Lilfa, and her skill gives all grade 2 or graders boost. Meaning that this card in the deck is actually a 23k booster, which is actually really good for the deck. And honestly would be kind of insane for almost anything. Any other deck. Imagine just having like a 23k booster for almost free for one Soul Blast. Insanely good. The issues with this card, let's say this is your only grade 3 in your hand. It's your only call target. Well, you have to call this, and it can only be called to open rearguard circle. So either you call it to the front, you swing at a rearguard for 23, and don't lose all that pressure to the Vanguard, or you call it to back row and don't get a extra attack, which is the whole point of Lilfa. So this card is a little bit bricky, which is why it's at 3, but honestly just 23k booster is pretty good, especially when you are boosting it with a grade 2, or you're boosting grade 2. It is 33, which is pretty good, and if it is a 15k grade 3, which we have a 1 in this deck, that is 38, which is just amazing numbers. But of course, when it's boosting a grade 3, numbers aren't as nice. If it's boosting this girl, then that is only 36. But it's still a decent number. Alright, so moving on to our last grade 3, we are actually going to be playing 4 copies of LV. So just going over LV's skill, it is in the front row rearguard circle. She actually protects all of your rearguards with different card names from being chosen by opponent's effect. And then if her attack hits a vanguard, you get a counter charge 1. So we are mainly playing LV because actually Lyrical does not have that many good generic grade 3s. If I had to, I looked through all of them, and I would say this is probably one of the best generic grade 3s. Don't get me wrong, this skill is pretty good. On-hit pressure and counter charge is very much appreciated in this deck. Normally, you don't need a ton of counterblast for the deck. You're just counterblasting 1 for Lilfa's skill each turn. There is one other card that uses counterblast, but aside from that, your biggest issue is really Soul. But you do have ways of replenishing it as well in this deck. And the protection really is nice, but the main reason we're playing this is because you need grade 3s. And if you were just playing 7 or even 8, that's not going to cut it, because if you don't have a grade 3 to call, you are not getting that multi-attack. You are not getting that bounce. I mean, I guess you get the bounce, but you get a bounce for 1 counterblast and nothing for it. So you need to be drawing into grade 3s, and you need to have grade 3s in order to call. And I just found this to be the very best one. All right, so moving on to the grade 2s, in this deck, our boosters, we're going to be starting off with one of the better cards, I would say. This is Prufla. She has a skill that when she is placed on rearguard, if you have a grade 3 or greater vanguard with Lilfa on the name, you can actually choose a grade 2 or less normal unit with Lilfa on its card name from your drop, and you get to put it into the soul, and then if you put it into the soul, it gets an extra 5k. So now this card is actually pretty good. I believe Kairi has a card that is very similar, where it puts Essence into the soul, but this card, especially in this deck, it is a 15k booster, since it is grade 2, or a 15k attacker if it's getting boosted by grade 3. But it honestly just like really good. You do use the 1 soul every single turn, and this card really just lets you refuel it. And the fact that you can actually bounce it back to the hand in this deck just makes this card overall really good. However, there is one exception. As I mentioned earlier, Lilfa's give boost is not a continuous skill. It is going to be just giving boost to whatever's on board. So let's say you ride into the grade 3 and you have the Prufla. Now the issue is you can play her and give her boost, but you're not going to be able to Soul Blast any of the ride line cards unless you want to use up your once per turn skill and not give it boost. The only way to really circumvent this is with our grade 3, calling it Calamity Towering, Soul Blasting them both out, and then placing her, putting back one of the cards you Soul Blasted out, basically making her cost, cutting her cost in half. However, that is a 2-card combo, and you're not always going to have it. And you are also going to be discarding cards for Ride Deck. So, while this is a really good card, a lot of the times when you're playing around, the hands are very awkward. You're always in a point where it's very hard to get the cards back into the soul, because you want to be calling out your board first, then Soul Blasting, and then what are you going to do? Call this after you've already built your board? It just conflicts so much with itself. But still, this is a pretty decent card. If Lilfa ever gets like decent support, this card could really just, I think this card would stay in, even with everything. Okay, moving on to the next card, another one that I think is actually pretty good. It's the double rare for Lilfa, Fleur Tree. So this is a grade 2, 10k. So it can get boosts or whatever. So this card has a skill that when your other rearguard is returned to your hand by a grade 3 or greater Vanguard's ability, you can counterblast 1 and slide this unit into the soul. You draw 1 card, choose a grade 3 card from your hand, and call it to an open rearguard circle. So this card, in case you can't tell, this card means that you can actually get 5 attacks in this deck, which when I just like read through all the cards, I thought that was honestly kind of insane, especially since you have like 10k boosters, 13k boosters, 23k boosters. I was just wondering to myself, how is this deck bad? But honestly, just like not being able to see the pieces, not having enough grade 3s, and having to play a ton of grade 2s as well to just like give yourself boosters, really just like, there's so many bricks in this deck. There's so many awkward hands. even though you are getting that 5 attacks, which you might think, oh, it's kind of awkward to set up, right? Because you could just call into the same column and Lilfa bounces the front row and back row. But what you do is you just, in case you didn't figure it out, you just call this to the front row, you boost it with a grade 3, you swing, and then you swing your Vanguard. Lilfa will bounce back a front row and back row, and then she will call one to the other side, and then you can just use this skill to counterblast one, slide her into the soul, and call another one here. So that is your 5 attacks. Hopefully you're under Persona Ride so that they are swinging for even bigger, and you can even not boost with the one column in order to give it another boost, in order to boost that column, because you always want to swing weakest first. But overall, pretty decent card. It does give you those 5 attacks. And I think, once again, if Lilfa gets some actual decent support, this card could actually, I think this card is going to be staying in the deck. Maybe toning it down a little, but still pretty good. Alright, and so for the last grade 2, I know this isn't really budget, but we do have 4 copies of Melty. So in case you don't know, Melty is a card from Fortuna Friends. She has the Friends ability, which doesn't matter in this deck, but obviously she is played for that second skill where she is placed on rear during the main phase. So if you call Melty off your ride line, you actually don't get that skill. You can't call it during the battle phase because you can only call grade 3s, unfortunately. But when it's placed during the main phase, you counterblast one, choose a card with one card with grade equal to or less than your Vanguard, call it to rear guard, and if you call, you get to draw a card. So this card, just generically good, is probably one of the best generic cards that Lyrical has access to. So I know it's not very budget. I'll give some alternatives at the end, but I think that Lilfa is in such a bad place right now. You really need all the help that you can get, so that's why we're playing the Melty. And other than Lilfa, this is the only thing you're using Counterblast on, so yeah. Alright, so for our last normal unit, we're just going to be playing those PGs. Obviously, you would take out one of these for a Sanctimonium if you have it. If you care enough about the deck to actually build it optimally, that's what you would do. Alright, and so moving on to the trigger lineup, I am just playing the 8 critical. This, as I said, this deck is struggling. When you have a struggling deck, what do? You slap an 8 crit. Obviously, just playing the effect triggers. Soul isn't really an issue too much in this deck. Sometimes it comes up, but honestly, at that point, you're probably just losing. I mean, you're losing anyway with this deck, but... Alright, and so for my last other 3 triggers, I am just playing 3 draws. These are just like generic draws, but obviously you would, if you cared enough about this deck, you would be playing the effect draws. I'm just not playing them because they're another deck right now, and they're also like $10, so I don't want to buy any more. I will say there is maybe an argument for playing more draws in this deck, like maybe even playing 5 or 6 or even 8 draws, just because you really need to be seeing your pieces a lot. But at the same time, you are losing out on a lot of shield value, and you're playing a lot of grade 3s, so I think you kind of need the criticals, at the very least for the shield value. And obviously you can't play front because your Vanguard swings and then you call 2 new things to the column, so they don't get any front power. Alright, so just finishing off your 4 heals, and of course, your Lyrical OT. Alright, so I thought I'd go over some budget alternatives to the Melty in case you don't want to play it. I would say recommend this grade 1 from Lyrical set 3. This is Ripley, and if she attacks, if you have 2 or more grade 2 or rear guard, or grade 2 or greater rear guards in your back row, it gets an extra 5k. So it is a 13k attacker, essentially just crafted for Lilfa. As I said, if you are going to be playing in grade 1s, they are going to be going into the front row because you do need to be having that full back row of grade 2 or graders. So this would naturally be one of the things you're swinging with, maybe something that you get bounced with. But honestly, a decent attacker makes nice number even if it's being boosted by a grade 2. The next card I would recommend is this card. This is Rudy from BT1, I believe. She is an 8k body, but when your rear guard is returned to the hand, she gets an extra 5k. So kind of the same logic as with Ripley, where it's a 13k attacker. But you do also note that I believe that stacks. So if you return 2 rear guards, she will be getting 10k as opposed to just a 5k. So you can either actually, as opposed to Ripley, use her as an attacker, or if you call her during the battle phase, you can leave her here. Swing with your other column, swing with your Vanguard, bounce either your Vanguard booster or the other booster and the front row, and then this will be getting the extra 10k, and then it can boost the last attack for an 18k boost. And of course, the last one would be if you're worried about grade 3s not having enough. This is probably where I would go for more grade 3s. This is Persis. So when she's placed on rear guard, if you have a Vanguard with Lilfa in its card name, you actually get a Soul Charge 1, and it gets an extra 2k until the end of turn. So Soul is not really a huge issue in the deck. Sometimes it comes up, but not very often. And the sad part is that it only gets 2k, which is really bad. But at the same time, it does make it a 15k booster, which is probably your next best booster. But it is just like second to the 23k booster. Of course, it's just by virtue of being like bigger numbers. And she can actually swing at the Vanguard as opposed to the other girl, but still not great with the deck. All right, so I figured I'd end the video with just kind of what your optimal board looks like. It's not. It is actually, your optimal board is pretty powerful, I will say, for standard. But as you're gonna know, it does require a whole bunch of pieces, which is something the deck is not very well equipped to do. Honestly, if the deck could like search out grade 3s, then it would honestly fix a lot of the issues that it has. But anyways, obviously you're going to be starting off your ideal turn with a Persona Ride, drawing a card. Hopefully your board has at least some of these cards. But essentially what you would want to do for like the most powerful attack you could do is calling 2 of these girls to the rear guard back row circles. And then hopefully you would have this in case you don't have another Lilfa. Call it Soul Blast 2. Soul Blasting the ride line and drawing 1 card, and hopefully you would draw into another grade 3 that can actually attack a Vanguard. In this case, we would call this girl, Prufia, and then we actually get to refund our Soul Blast, putting the Lilfa back into the Soul. So now this becomes a 15k, and then we would call our double rare to the other side. So now we would use Lilfa's skill, Soul Blasting 1, and then all 3 of these girls get boost. So this is actually going to be 18, or since we're on Persona Ride, 23, and then this is going to be swinging for 20. So what we probably do is swing for 20 at the Vanguard, swing for 28, pretty good number, and then we'd swing for 28 yet again with the Vanguard. We would do our drive checks, and then, assuming we have 2 open damage, we would use Lilfa's skill, counterblasting 1, bouncing back the girl in the back row as well as this, and calling it back out. So it gets another 5k. We don't get a draw, obviously, but you know, it's still fine. And then since we have another counterblast, we would counterblast 1, move this card into the Soul, call back out another grade 3. We do actually get a draw. Call out the other grade 3, and now we have 2 more attacks, and these attacks are hitting for big numbers. Not accounting for triggers, this is 26, 36, 46 on Persona Ride, and then this is also 36, obviously. No, it's not. It's actually 41 because of the extra 5k. So those are really big numbers, especially for 4th and 5th attacks. So if you can get this board set up, if you can play your cards right, so where you have enough open CB and you drew into multiple grade 3s and this card, you can actually push for really big numbers. However, a lot of the times you're going to be missing 1 or 2 pieces, and what you're going to end up doing is just calling 1 out and swinging maybe 1 more time. So really, the deck is just in a really bad place at the moment. All right, so that's going to do it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Maybe it's inspired you to try and build it yourself. Maybe you think you can do a little bit better with the build than me. Go right ahead. I do really think this deck needs a lot of extra work from Bushiroad. But that's going to do it for me. If you enjoyed, go ahead and do all those YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, whatever. And I'll see you guys in the next one.